forestry, or in other environmental areas. And of course, I want to especially welcome our dear friends from ASEAN-CRN, the ASEAN-CRN focal points, and all national focal points from ASEAN sectoral bodies. This meeting, as it already happened with the first consultation workshop that we held a few months back, is being hosted by the Malaysian Agriculture Research and Development Institute, MARDI. And therefore, before I will continue guiding you through this meeting, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Shukri bin Mad Ali, who is the director of the Agrobiodiversity and Environment Research Center of MARDI. Good to have you back, Dr. Shukri. And please, the floor is yours to also welcome our participants.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Very good morning to all of you. Distinguished representatives from ASEAN member states, ASEAN Secretariat, GIZ, CRCA, and development partners. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope everybody is fine today and welcome back. On behalf of MARDI, Malaysian Agricultural Research and Development Institute, and as a member of ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today, and MARDI is delighted to host the second consultation workshops on the third volume of the ASEAN Guidelines for promoting climate smart agriculture, or CSA practices. In close coordination with the ASEAN Technical Working Groups on Agricultural Research and Development, or ATWGARD, where MARDI serves as the chair this year, ASEAN-CRN and partners have facilitated the development of several key ASEAN policy and technical documents in the past years. This includes the 2 volumes of the ASEAN CSA Guidelines, which have been endorsed by the senior official meeting of the ASEAN Ministers on Agricultural and Forestry, or SOM-AMAF, in 2015 as well as in 2017. Yeah. Okay. The volume 3 will expand and complement the first 2 volumes, particularly focusing on providing practical guidance to ASEAN member states planning to scale out their climate smart practices in agriculture, land use, and rural development. The first consultation workshop was organized on the 7th of July this year, and the workshop highlighted 2 important points. First, there is a need to identify assessment guidelines and implementation principles for CSA adoptions and upscaling. Second, it is important to look at CSA from a system-level perspective. Please allow me to highlight once again that these guidelines will be part of a set of regional policy frameworks and tools which contribute to distilling global, regional, and national best practices for the benefit of all ASEAN member states. Policy tools like these guidelines bring forward the ASEAN agenda at the intersection between food, agriculture, forestry, and climate change. They serve as a reference for policymakers and practitioners in the region when developing and implementing national policies and programs in these areas. Therefore, we would like to highly welcome your feedback and input to jointly shape the document to be resourceful, meaningful, and relevant for policymakers in the ASEAN member states. On behalf of MARDI and as a member of ASEAN-CRN, I would like to extend appreciation and gratitude for the continuous support of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, through the GIZ Climate Smart Land Use, CSLU, in ASEAN project in this regard. I would also like to thank the research team from the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, or CRCA, for providing their expertise in developing these guidelines. I wish you a fruitful discussions on this important topic today, and let us continue our collective efforts to implement climate smart agriculture practices for reduced emissions, increase production, foster adaptation and resilience to climate change in the region. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Back to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shukri. Great, nothing to add to that. And yeah, thanks again for reminding us why we are here today. I don't want to waste more time with introduction to the endeavor. I believe everyone has been informed through the continuous communication that we provided in the past month, and also through this great summary by Dr. Shukri. Miso team, could you please share the next slide on technical guidance for the Microsoft Teams platform? I just want to very briefly explain how the Microsoft Teams platform works for those of you who are not that familiar with the technology right now. Can you move to the slide? I believe it's slide 3. Yeah, thanks. So at the top of the screen, you can see the menu bar of the Microsoft Teams environment. Here you can see in the right corner a little symbol for your camera. Please feel free to switch the camera on, especially when you want to make an intervention. It would be great to see your face, and also when we take a group picture later on, but you can also switch the camera off again. There's also the microphone symbol. You can switch it on when you want to talk, but when you are not talking, please always keep it off so that we have a good audio quality. A little bit further to the, no, actually a little bit further to the left on the screen, you can see a raise hand sign. So if you want to speak, if you have a question, if you have a comment, just click on this little hand symbol, and then we can see that you want to talk. Or alternatively, you can also open the chat, click on the little bubble symbol, then to your right, a chat window will open where you can type in your questions and comments and send them to us. We will monitor the chat and will address your comments and question when there is time for that. And yes, please feel free to at any time let us know if you want to say something or speak. We will. It might take a little bit until we call upon you, so that we can maybe let our speaker finish a thought. But yeah, at any time, please feel free to let us know if you want to make an intervention. Okay, next slide, please. So just so you know, this meeting is being recorded, and we will publish the recording later on. So people who cannot join us here today live have also the chance to follow our discussions. By joining this meeting, you give consent that that you are being recorded with this meeting, and that we can also publish that. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda that we have today. The whole meeting will run until roughly 1 p.m. Jakarta, 2 p.m. Manila time, but there will be also a break in between so that you can refresh yourselves a little bit. We will have in total 3 inputs given by our research team from CSA. Our first input will summarize the results of a regional survey that has been conducted by CSA. We will then have some room for discussion about the results of the survey and get further inputs, further views from your side on the results. After a short break and group photo, we will have basically the hard piece input for this workshop. We will hear about the proposed noted outline for the 3rd volume of the ASEAN Guidelines for CSA practices. So that is the core topic that we want to discuss with you today for this workshop. You have all received the noted outline together with the invitation link, but in case you don't have it ready right now, my colleague Sophie also posted a link to a website where you can download the noted outline again in the chat box. After the input on the noted outline, we will again have a very short input on the policy landscape for climate-smart agriculture practices. Armed with all this information, we will then go into breakout groups. I will explain about the mechanics of the breakout groups a little bit later on, but basically what we will do during this breakout room session is discuss about individual chapters of the noted outline to get your perspectives on what can be improved, what could be done differently, or what could be contents, because now we are talking about the structure of the guidelines, but we would also like to hear some further inspirations what should be reflected in the content later on. We will discuss the findings of the breakout groups in plenary afterwards, and then we will, of course, summarize results, talk about the next steps, and then we also will hear some closing remark from the ASEAN Secretariat. Before I hand over to our speakers from the research team, let me briefly remind you about what has happened until now. As Dr. Shukri already reminded us, we already held already a first consultation workshop. It happened on 7th July. Was also hosted by MARDI, and we had approximately 75 participants representing 7 different ASEAN sectoral bodies or who came from other government agencies, different development organizations. So a quite diverse group of people. We discussed about the experiences made with Volume 1 and 2 of the ASEAN Guidelines for promoting CSA practices. We talked about the evolution and emergence of shocks and stresses related to climate change in Southeast Asia, and based on that, we then reflected about proposed strategies for CSA promotion and implementation. Next slide. What followed after was that our CIRCA team conducted a regional survey on CSA approaches on a systems level. They wanted to get a better understanding what is already being implemented, what are good practices in the ASEAN region, and we will talk about the results in a minute. Based on desk research, the results of the survey, and the results of the first consultation workshop, the research team developed the noted outline that we will discuss today. So that is where we stand. And with this, I would like to move to the first presentation about the results and the analysis of the regional survey on the system level approaches for CSA. The presentation will be given by Elson Galang, who will be presenting on behalf of the technical experts team from CIRCA, where he serves as a technical specialist. He is a licensed agriculturalist in the Philippines and currently a PhD candidate and Tomlinson Fellow at the McGill University in Canada, and he holds a Master's of Sustainable Science from the United Nations University in Japan. Elson, please introduce us to the results of the survey.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Hannah, for that very wonderful introduction. Let me share my slides for everyone. Could you see it now? Ms. Hannah, could you see it? Could you confirm if you could see it?
I can see it. Looks good.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good morning from your side and good evening from my side. So yeah, I am Elson. I will be presenting on behalf of the research team from the CIRCA side, where I serve as the technical specialist for that team together with wonderful colleagues, Dr. Romeo Labios, Dr. Ped Orencio, Ms. Donna, Ms. Anna, Ms. Rochella, Ms. Nears. So yeah, but very quickly before I officially begin, as Ms. Hannah mentioned, I'm based here in Canada right now, where I'm finishing my PhD and where I am a fellow at McGill University. And part of our commitment here in Canada in every formal presentations that we do is to always begin with a land acknowledgement of where we do our presentations. This is to recognize that the land we are on and were originally owned by our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So let me just begin very quickly by stating that the university where I am doing this presentation right now has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. So we acknowledge and thank this Indigenous peoples whose presence marks the territory on which peoples of the world now gather. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving me that chance for that land acknowledgement. So yes, to officially begin this presentation, as Ms. Hannah mentioned, the CIRCA team did a regional survey in August about different systems level approaches to climate smart agriculture, and I will be presenting to you today the results and the analysis of such a survey. So as we all know, we already have 2 volumes of the ASEAN Guidelines. That would be volume 1 in 2015 and then volume 2 in 2017, and each of that volume presented and provided, highlighted, described different climate smart agriculture practices. So in volume 1, 4 CSA practices were described and were highlighted, while in volume 2, there were 5 that were additional um, that were discussed in the volume. So now we have this challenge that for the upcoming volume, the CSA Volume 3, we hope to feature new CSA practices in addition to those that we already have from Volume 1 and Volume 2. And as Ms. Hannah mentioned, and as Dr. Shukri mentioned, we did the first consultation workshop a couple of months ago. And on July 7, 2021, during that workshop, there was a call to showcase systems level approaches to CSA. So there was this very strong encouragement to nudge the content of Volume 3 to highlight CSA practices at systems level. So what do we exactly mean by systems level? So here we present the idea of CSA systems level approaches, which we want to acronize as CASA. So when I say CASA, I mean the systems level approaches. So this is the working definition that we work with. So it's an integrated set of practices that increase productivity and incomes, enhance resilience of livelihood and ecosystems, reduce and remove greenhouses across systems, community level, through multi-stakeholder participation. So why don't we look at this definition in more detail? So if you look at this definition that we have adopted, we want to highlight in Volume 3, climate smart agriculture practices that are part of an integrated set. So it's not just a single technology or not just a single commodity practice, but we want CASAs that are actually integrated set of practices which contribute to the 3 pillars of CSA, which are enumerated here. And then we want to contextualize these practices in systems at the community level. And another important element of this working definition is the participation of different multi-stakeholders. Now, why is there a need for us for a systems level approach for CSA or CASA? So again, Volume 1 and Volume 2 focus on single component or technology, like for example, the alternate wetting and drying for rice or for corn. However, when we apply this in communities, the expert team decided that there is a need to integrate these component technologies in actually systems level perspective. And if we do this, if we integrate these different practices and technologies under that big umbrella of systems level, we could actually recognize that they are interconnected and they do not only focus on production per se, like for example, those component or technology in Volume 1 and 2, but actually that this integrated set of practices, that this CASAs transcends value chains and food systems from crop, fish, animal to forestry systems. And this translates to better achievement of the 3 pillars of CSA. So it's not just a question of whether we are achieving mitigating greenhouse gases or we are trying to build resilience for adaptation for climate change. But in fact, we're trying to address all 3 pillars of the CSA with this systems approaches. And ultimately, under this purview, we hope that by promoting CASAs, we could increase resilience in the food systems by 1, distributing the risks, and 2, maximizing the synergies across these different practices, and finally, reducing trade-offs across the different components of that system. Going back, so in workshop 1, there was a need for us to highlight this CASAs in the upcoming Volume 3. So the next step that CIRCA did was, in close coordination with GIZ, with CSLU, we spearheaded a regional survey across ASEAN to solicit for feedback and suggestions for CASAs. So we circulated the survey across members of ASEAN-CRN, ATWGARD, and other ASEAN sectoral bodies. Of course, the participants of the first regional consultation workshop we had last July, and we have also invited feedback and suggestions from experts from different research and academic institutions from the region. So we circulated the survey from the 5th to the 25th of August of 2021, and the survey included different kinds of questions, multiple choice, checklist, and open-ended questions, which are mostly optional questions to allow the time for the participants to answer the questions. And at the end, we received a decent size of 37 responses from these members of these institutions. In that survey, so the CSA expert team, our team, pre-identified 3 systems approaches, CASAs, that represent different forms of systems in the community level. So we understand that systems at the community level is not just a single system, but in fact, they could be different kinds of systems. So that is our goal there, is to showcase what are the different systems and then ask them later on their feedback and suggestions. So these CASAs that we have pre-identified were based on the outputs of the first workshop, and as Ms. Hannah said, based on the desk reviews and the consultations that we have done from our team. So I'm not so sure how many of the participants here right now have actually answered the survey, but the survey highlighted 3 pre-identified CASAs, including a climate smart village, which reflects agroecological systems. And then we have direct seeded rice systems, which reflect value chain systems. And then we have the climate smart mapping and adaptation planning, which reflects that of digital support systems. So part of that survey was to identify the status and various aspects of these CASAs in Southeast Asia. So very quickly, I will not explain each one of these in detail, but climate smart villages is an approach that is really an integrated set of different practices that are being identified and implemented through participatory methods. And these practices applies to all sectors, including fisheries, forestry, and then, so what you see here is that you have this needs responsive and very context specific in the locality of different CSA practices that are being combined to address the conditions and the goals of that community. And then we have direct seeded rice system. So for some, they may consider this as a single technology, but in fact, you could consider this as a systems, because when you talk about the process of direct seeded, which are rice directly sown, either in dry or wet field, but you actually complement that with different CSA practices across the rice production value chain. So for example, you have the actual practice of direct seeding, but across the value chain where it is part of, you complement that with different CSA practices, not only from the production, but actually the CSA practices could come in from input selection to post-harvest management. And then finally, another CASA that we have suggested in that survey that represents digital support system or climate smart mapping and adaptation planning, or other related ICT-based digital support system. So the idea here is that it is a support system that helps different scales, for example, communities, or to the national scale, to help them plan what are the most appropriate CSA practices that can be adopted and implemented given all these ICT-based generated information and data. So we have presented that in the survey and then asked the respondents whether these 3 kinds of CASAs are worthy of inclusion in the 3rd volume. How about their implementation status right now? How about the scale of its implementation? Are there policies or programs present? Who are the stakeholders involved? And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic response to this, because one of the goals for the 3rd volume is to showcase these CSA practices, in this case, CASAs, that have been found to have helped communities respond to the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. So in a sense, this is the contribution of volume 3 to the call of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, where it explicitly stated the role of CSA in trying to help out cope from the impacts of this pandemic. So very quickly, this table shows you whether they want the CSAs to be included. I think that graph simply shows you that, yes, there is an overwhelming yes for these CASAs to be included in the third volume. So that translates for us to if you have read the annotated outline, that translates to us engaging these 3 CASAs into the annotated outline that we have just circulated a few weeks ago. And then there's this question, like, are the CASA being implemented in your country? So if you look at this figure, it simply shows you that the 3 CASAs are already being implemented among AMS. However, there is still quite a strong non-implementation of other ICT-related systems, or maybe lack of knowledge thereof, or maybe the respondent in his or her or their AMS just don't know if they already have that kind of ICT-related systems in their states. But what we see in this graph is that these CASAs are, in a sense, already being implemented. But the question is, like, how is this CASA be implemented in terms of scale? And we see in this figure that the scale of implementation really varies. So if you see direct seeded rice, for example, it is mostly implemented across individual farmers. And then you have CS map, which is implemented with clusters of farmers, which we think reflects that digitization in agriculture is being applied on larger scales. But what's interesting here is for climate smart villages is that there is a mix which really reflects that from individual to landscape framework that the CSV is using. So now, okay, we know that these are implemented these are the scales. So now question is, like, do we actually have policies and programs in the implementation of these CASAs? So in a sense, there are knowledge on policies and programs that support implementation, especially for CSV, where there seems to be a highly available policy and program or high knowledge thereof. However, what's so interesting here is that there's still an inadequate knowledge on policy and on programs on DSR, on NCS map, or other ICT-based digital systems. So that reflects that some of the respondents are not so sure whether they already have these in terms of policies or programs. Now, so it's being implemented. We have certain policies. Now, who are involved in the implementation of these CASAs? So again, I think it's quite apparent that farmers and farming families are the most involved. There are also strong participation, as perceived by the respondents at least, by academic stakeholders and policymakers. So these are the 3 main actors in terms of implementing these systems level approaches, where you have the farmers, where you have the academe, and you have the policymakers, which I think kind of captures that idea of multi-stakeholder participation. But there's still a lack of participation among other important actors, for example, traders, local people, and marginalized groups, especially for the case of DSR and CS map and other ICT-based management decision systems. So if you see here, there seems to still be a gap in terms of that idea of what we want to highlight here of trying to achieve a system, or highlight a systems level which tries to bring in multi-stakeholder participation, not just in the usual participants, including the farmers, the academe, and the policymakers, but also all the other actors that might prove relevant and important for the implementation of these CASAs. And this question of how did these CASAs help communities cope with the impacts of COVID-19? So in a sense, this very quickly, it's just all of these CASAs were perceived to have helped communities cope with COVID-19, especially for those who have already implemented these in their countries or in their communities. So especially this reflects a lot on sustaining local food requirements and providing alternative source of livelihood. So overall, that survey, the bottom line there is that the results of that survey encourage the inclusion of those 3 CASAs in the upcoming 3rd volume of the CSA guidelines. So we've seen in that data and in that information that we have potential data that back these CASAs in achieving the 3 pillars of CSA, which could then be further expounded in the next steps of the development process. So we have also asked very quickly in that survey if they have other suggested CASAs. So there were quite some suggestions in that survey, like such as climate foresight planning, climate resiliency field school. And then what we did was to look at them, and then we saw that most of them are either already part of that CASA, which we could merge, or already part of volume 1 and 2, or the other is not really a CASA per se, but more of an overarching concept that tries to guide these systems approaches to CSA. So now for my last slides before I end my presentation. So we have those 3 CASAs, but then during the survey, the recurring recommendation was that there was a need to include systems approaches that would represent animal and forestry sectors. Yep. So there was that call among the respondents to highlight these sectors as well in terms of those new CSA systems level approaches. So it's a question of like what kind of animal systems and forestry systems do we include? So in a recent workshop organized by GIZ, so it's not a workshop, but a learning event per se, there was a call to highlight low emission animal production systems, or LEAPs. And then what happened next was that with further consultations with the expert team, we have identified a forestry system CSA in the form of community-based forest management. So in a sense, you have these 5 CASAs that were identified by the expert team from both the survey, the consultations, the desk reviews, and the different learning events that was highlighted. And this will serve as chapter 3 of the 3rd volume of the ASEAN Guidelines for CSA. So later on, in the presentation, the 2nd presentation, you will see the content of the volume, and this will be the 3rd chapter of that of the volume 3, and will be discussed further by Dr. Romeo Labios. And chapter 3 will be discussed, so each of those CASA will be discussed in terms of this content, from technical description to the current programs, the food, how it addresses the systems, contributions to the 3 pillars, and contributions to COVID-19 response. So later on, you will see this more from Dr. Romy, but I just want to highlight this slide that what you just saw is just a portion of the whole volume 3, and that would be the 3rd chapter, which are about the systems level approaches for CASA, which is also a result of the different research processes that we have conducted in the expert team. So thank you so much, everyone. So I think after this, we will have a question and answer portion. Dr. Romy, Dr. Ped, and the rest of the expert team will also be here to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elson, for this comprehensive presentation. I believe you also prepared 2 questions you would like to the audience, where you would like to get some feedback on. But before we move to that, please allow us to take some general questions and comments from the floor. And I already see one raised hand, I believe, from Dada. Dada, please ask your questions or make your comment.
Hannah, apologies for being the first one to answer a question, to pose. Maybe I won't pose questions. I will want to push 2 things. So my name is Dada Bakudo. I've been the lead in creating, together with ASEAN-CRN, the first 2 volumes of CSA. And my first point is that you invented a new term called CASA. And I would like to say, do you have support mechanisms behind this new term? I would like to share our experience of why we created promotion of CSA in the past. In 2015, we were not intending to put particular term behind the practices that we want to give as guidance. It just so happened that in 2014, 2015, the term CSA was launched by FAO with the brains behind it from the CGIR group or the CCAFS group. And then shortly behind that, the governments of Canada, Holland, who until now went behind it as the financial and technical support behind the team. So what I'm trying to say is, and we know that we are a short-term GIZ project. So there is no long-term sustainable support for the creation of a term. I would just like to emphasize the responsibility behind the creation of a new term. So in that sense, when we created the first and second volume, we just said, okay, let's just put CSA behind it, because beyond this project term, beyond GIZ, there are huge forces that will support this new term. Yeah, and in introducing new terms in ASEAN, it also always carries a huge responsibility of not creating confusion. For example, the way I understand the CASA approach that you've just explained, it's no different from what is happening with the food system approach right now that was created by the same people. And in fact, CRN is largely also involved in the creation of dialogues supporting inputs to the food system summit, which is happening right now. So especially on Action Track 3, Nature Positive Food Production, this could come in the way you describe CASA is the way one can see the food system framework. And so I would like to give you a caution against new terms, because it's always confusing to ASEAN. When we first introduced CSA, and it's not even our responsibility because it's the UN's responsibility, but we thought we don't want to create confusion, we don't want to create new terms, we'll go with what there is support. ASEAN even asked us, is there climate stupid approaches, you know? So this kind of, and it took us years for them to understand CSA as a term. And then in many webinars and many interaction that's happening right now, I could really sense, as the CRN coordinator right now, a sort of confusion with our policymakers of what to adopt, because the food system is very strong as a campaign right now, and how you explain CASA is actually a food system approach. And how you explain CASA is also the system that the creators of CSA already investigated. If you went into the works of Jana Körner, of CCAFS, it's basically that. So I'm just saying, don't ditch it, but I'm giving you caution based on experience of really giving new terms that confuses. They are like, Dada, what is nature-based approach? What is food system? There is CSA, there's agrobiodiversity. So we really don't want to focus on new terms. We want to focus more on practices. And anyway, when you showed the survey result at the end, it went back again to what approaches do they want guidance from. You know, you are looking again and showing guidance from approaches. It went again to what kind of practices do they want guidance from. But of course, the system approach is always being implemented. I would suggest go with whatever the big players are out there already promoting, because this is a GIZ project that has a time frame. And I don't know who's going to be behind the term CASA of big players that will be behind this term. And if you try to introduce this to ASEAN, there's a big responsibility behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dada, and well noted. any further, before I ask the CIRCA team to respond, any further comments or questions? Anything unclear? Dr. Mark?
Yes. You, Mr. Anna, you allow me?
Yes, of course.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. And yeah, of course, I think it's a good opportunity, and because we would like to, yeah, to the guideline, yeah, of course, should be go around the three main objectives. Because in Cambodia we have our agriculture committee of climate change. For CSA, we are concentrate to the around agriculture, forestry, and livestock or fishery around. And the main objective is sustainable increasing agriculture productivity and income. Yeah, to resilient to the south. Yeah, that is one. And second, we focus on adaptation. Yeah, and build resilient to the climate change, such as what adaptation technology, adaptation practices or innovation to be used on crop, or livestock, or aquaculture, or fishery, or forestry, yeah, or something like this. And third is the use like the mitigation, yeah, like you said. For example, in livestock, we are focused on biodigester, yeah, slaughterhouse management to avoid, yeah, something like this, and also some practices are support to. That is, yeah, of course, the guidelines should be go around, because now we are going to implement this within the country. So the guideline is, I agree, like you include finance, governance, management, whatever, but and digital, that is very important. But for the, how to call, technology, practices, best practices, and innovation, support for the CSA, implement like yeah, that is my comment around what you are, and the concept of how to farm. That is very good approach, very good tool. So should be introduced to, how to call, in order to promote the resilient in inclusive growth. Yeah, inclusive growth of rural economy or whatever, yeah, related to the livelihood. So that is my general observation through this presentation. And if you could more specific with the three main objectives of targeted, yeah, to avoid, yeah, just because we would like to use this tool to implement, and of course in our technical working group within crop, as well as within how to call, climate resilience network, we will harmonize, yeah, in terms of regulatory, in terms of guideline, in terms of approach, in terms of technology and innovation, yeah, in terms of how to call, enabling environments, financing, yeah, in order to, yeah, and on COP26, we also will report on this. Yeah, CSA is a point to COP26 also. Yeah, that is. Thank you. That is my not a question. I understand that, and I just would like to have a scope on to this point. Thank you very much for giving floor to me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the comment, Dr. Mack. So, Elson or someone else from the CIRCA team, do you want to respond to our first two comments?
Yeah, I think I could quickly respond to Dr. Mark's comment first. I think this will be further explained with the presentation of Dr. Romy and the second presentation later, where he would explain these different guidelines and different principles that could guide different AMS in trying to promote and adopt this different technologies, not only the one in volume 3, but also the previous technologies from practices rather, from volume 1 and 2. Yeah, so but I agree. Like for example, like how these practices contribute to the 3 pillars of CSA, how they enhance resilience, how they increase productivity, and how they reduce greenhouse gas emissions would be part of the volume 3, not just in the explanation or the descriptions of these practices, but also in the other chapters, like in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. So that's just my take on that comment by Dr. Mark. But thank you, Dr. Mark. Later on, Doc Romy will expound on that further. So I guess I just wanted to address the comment of Ma'am Dada. You know, well, in a sense, I completely agree with you, Ma'am Dada, that it's a term. So I guess from our side, from a research perspective side, it's a term that we have adopted to operationalize the context and the framework that we are working on. So I guess it just makes the research process easier from our side, because trying to contextualize CSA under that systems level. But you're right, we have actually adopted the definition of food systems in the context of climate smart agriculture. So what we did was to build on the existing definition of food systems and try to further contextualize it in a more specific way of CSA. But you're right, I think it would be, we have to revisit our term again, but I think we are on the same page of what we are trying to present here and showcase. But from our side, I feel like we will revisit them, and especially given your suggestions on food systems, which I think was very helpful, especially now that we are still in the drafting phase, and then we'll build on this later on. But I completely agree with your comments there. But I feel like we are on the same page, but you know, we just need to work on it on a, you know, like meet more in the more, you know, in the more, I don't know the word, but I think you know what I mean. So yeah, but thank you so much for that comment and suggestion. And yeah, go ahead, Ms. Dada.
Just remember the immense responsibility to ASEAN and policymakers when introducing a new term. It's quite immense. Financial, technical, and big movement behind it. Yeah.
That could I just share with you, and you see, I think the roadmap for Cambodia for food system, we have one point we call resilient livelihood and resilient food security, food system. So I think all guidelines, I think I should be included, because we have put in our target to the 2030 for the resilient livelihood and resilient food system, so we can share with you for our roadmap. Thank you.
Yes, great. Any reference point that you might have, and this goes to all of our participants, any reference points for policies, for practices that might be relevant in this context, yes, please share with us and the research team. We need these kinds of input to make this document as grounded as possible in realities and addressing the actual needs that countries have in order to scale up their practices. So yes, please, and any references are highly welcome. I don't see any hands and comments right now. So Elson, do you maybe want to pose a question to the audience?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think we have a lot of time left. Like we have a few minutes, but I guess, I mean, one of the things that we wanted to get from the survey results are really like what are the potential explanation? Oh, there's a hand from Margaret.
Okay, so I just I'm listening. If we have some consensus on the change of the name, the change of a new word, CASA here. I hope we have consensus first. And I hope that the original intention of the volume 3 would not create some confusion, as Dada says, that it is actually a volume 3. That means that it's a continuation of our previous initiatives already, which the ministers already endorsed. So I hope that we could have some consensus on whether to change CASA or the original name. However, the point is, as already presented, that's good. The content is okay. Back to you.
Okay. Yes, this is noted. This was definitely something that will feed into the revision of the document. Any further comments or questions right now?
And I think that's also something that we could closely consult with the ASEAN-CRN team that term, and yes, it's something that we will revisit after this consultation workshop.
Any further thoughts and comments related to the 5 practices that have been suggested, that have been pre-selected by the research team based on different sources they consulted? Are there any immediate reactions? We will come back to that in the breakout groups, but if you have any immediate reactions to that, please feel free to add. So if there's no further immediate reaction, as I said, this was just to present you the results of this regional survey. It is, of course, not the only source of information that the research team has considered, and it will also not be the final point of this research endeavor. That is just a reflection on one of the sources that we will use for further working on that paper. But we will come back to the question on what practices to include in the volume 3 in the breakout groups. So if there's no immediate reaction to that, we would like to take a short break, 5 minutes. But before we go to the break, it would be nice to have a picture, a screenshot of everyone who's gathered here today. So if you can, please switch off on your camera so that we can see your faces, that we get an impression of the diversity of people gathered here today from so many different ASEAN countries. So please show me your faces just for 1-2 minutes so that our technical support team can take a picture. And I hand over to whoever is taking the picture.
Miss Sue.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Other one. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
That's it already? Okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes. So please use the short break to grab a glass of water or whatever you need. We'll see you back in 5 minutes. And then we'll continue our discussion. Oh, sorry. Welcome back. I hope you had the chance to just grab a quick refreshment or tell the colleague next door to be more quiet so that you can concentrate on our upcoming inputs, because now we will move into basically the heart of the suggested structure for the 3rd volume of the ASEAN CSA guidelines. Please always remember this is just a very initial draft. So this is the current status of thinking of the research team. We are here to collect your feedback. We already got some feedback now from our first discussion, and please feel free to share any further thoughts in the upcoming breakout room discussions. But before we continue discussing with you, I would like to invite Dr. Romeo Labios to present on the draft outline that has been shared with you with the invitation, and you can also find the link for download in the chat box. Dr. Romeo Labios is an operations consultant of CIRCA. Prior to joining CIRCA in 2022, he served as a scientist and agronomist at the International Rice Research Institute, or short IRI, and was based in Myanmar. And he led the implementation of several projects for IRI there. Prior to that, he was a university researcher and affiliate faculty at the Agricultural Systems Institute of the University of the Philippines. He also contributed to developing the CSA Guideline Volume 1, so he's very much familiar with this process. And he obtained his PhD in agronomy from the Iowa State University, USA. So please, Doc Romy, please guide us through the proposed outline for the Volume 3.
Okay, thank you for that kind introduction, Hannah. Good morning to everyone and good evening to Elson. So this morning, I will be presenting the annotated outline for the third volume of the ASEAN Guidelines for Promotion and Adoption of CSA. So this presentation will describe the proposed content and structure using the annotated outline that was sent to you a week before this presentation. Okay, let me start by showing this slide first to get a better picture. So there's a need for a systematic approach in prioritizing the known CSA practices for better adaptation and mitigation planning of climate change-related programs at scale. So this stepwise process suggests the AMS a promotion adoption process. It begins with identifying or inventory of available CSA practices that have potential for a particular scale, including this new term that was discussed a while ago, but of course we're gonna work on it again, that were just presented by Elson. Another example are those from Volume 1 and 2 that was mentioned also, and from the other CSA compendium, like that the case of Vietnam and the Philippines, and other sources. But the question now is, what assessment indicators are needed in order to prioritize these numbers of CSA practices that you have? For example, if you have at least 5 or 10 CSA practices to choose from. And to do that, we are suggesting this process, what we call participatory prioritization process. And in this case, it will be based on these 5 indicators, which will be discussed later. And as you go to this process of prioritization, you will come out with prioritized list of CSA practices. And once you have this one, the next question is how these CSA practices or prioritized CSA practices will be implemented at scale in the AMS selected site or sites. And that brings us to these suggestions of following these 5 principles. And during my first presentations, we call it strategy, and that time is 7. So we now combine some of those strategies, and we call it now 5 practices. Or 5 principles, sorry, 5 principles. But please note that the implementation must be coupled with a result-based monitoring system that can provide insights in the adoption process, And through this process, the national policies and programs can be reviewed, created, or institutionalized to enhance adoption. Okay, this was already presented by Elson, the outline of the content of Volume 3. And this will include a rationale. Chapter 1 will include participatory approach in prioritization of CSA practices. Chapter 2 will include the 5 suggested principles for the promotion and adoption of CSA practices. And Chapter 3 was just presented by Elson. And finally, Chapter 4 will include partners, coordinating, and implementing institutions for CSA across scales. So let me discuss the different chapters in detail. In Chapter 1, a suggested 5 participatory assessment approach to determine CSA practices among stakeholders was adopted based from the publication of Chatrick and Chetty et al. In 2017. And this is also the same strategy or the same approach that we followed when we developed the Compendium of the Philippines, Compendium of CRA Practice in the Philippines. So this participatory approach for prioritization includes an indicator-based guide to assess the different CSA practices that increase productivity and resilience of farmers, as well as mitigate greenhouse gas emission. And the suggested 5 assessments are the following. Assessment of CSA interventions. 2 is assessment of implementation feasibility. 3rd is assessment of adoption barriers. 4th is assessment of incentive mechanisms. And the 5th is assessment of key implementation players. So let me discuss this in more detail. So in the case of the number 1, assessment of CSA intervention, this is in relation to the contribution of CSA practices to the 3 pillars of CSA. 1 is in determining the productivity rate in absence of biotic and abiotic stresses. 2 is resilience in the presence of biotic and abiotic stresses. And 3rd is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, emission rate. Now, in terms of scoring, a Likert scaling with a value of negative, meaning reduction, and a value of positive, meaning increase, will be used here. For example, for the indicator enhanced productivity, scoring is based on intervention response to productivity with scores of -10 to +10, and the same for other indicators. Now, to give you a better picture, this slide shows the sample assessment form for assessing CSA interventions. On the first column are the different CSA practices that you may have now, or in this case, these are based from the compendium that we developed. And the succeeding columns are some guide questions to assess the 3 indicators on the upper head here. So, for example, in question, in indicator under productivity, one of the questions can be, does the intervention help to increase productivity? And the other question may be, does the intervention help to increase income? And so forth with the other indicators. However, these indicators and templates could be modified based on what each group thought was appropriate for each practices, as well as with the ecosystem. So you could do some modification here depending on your purpose. So this is an example of the summary of the assessment scores for CSA practices for irrigated lowland ecosystem based from these 3 indicators: productivity, resilience, and emission. So you could see here, we have a number of CSA intervention or practices, and based on the scoring, we could come out with the top 3 or top 5 choices here under this assessment indicator. Now, on number 2 assessment, which is on implementation feasibility, this indicator assess implementation feasibility that determines whether the intervention is fiscally, ethically, and administratively feasible. And this is the summary table or the form, and then the assessment scores of CSA practices for irrigated lowland ecosystem in the Philippines. So you have these 3 guides here and the scoring here. Now, the 3rd assessment guide is assessment of adoption barriers. The assessment of adoption barriers determine the different external and internal constraints that can affect the level of adoption of farmers and other stakeholders, such as availability of resources, access to extension services and market, and awareness and acceptability by the farmers. So this slide shows the summary of adoption barriers assessment scores of the different CSA practices and some of the guide indicators here. The fourth assessment is on incentive mechanisms, which is very important also. So the assessment for incentive mechanisms motivate or encourage farmers and other stakeholders to adopt and replicate the CSA practices such as access to subsidy, access to credit or affordable credit, access to capacity building, and linkage with market. So this slide shows the summary of the incentive mechanism assessment scores of CSA practices in irrigated lowlands. So you can see here the different indicators and guide. So on the last assessment, which is on key implementation players, this will identify the respective roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders in the dissemination and promotion of CSA practices like the farmers, the youth, the people's organizations, the government, and private sectors, and others. And this is the summary of key implementation players assessment scores for the different CSA practices for irrigated lowland ecosystem. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with the different rankings that you have? So after all summary scores are completed, the next step is to list down all these top 3 or 5, if you would like to, CSA intervention and rank them accordingly. So this prioritized list of the, after undergoing these different indicators, will now be used for implementation at scale of the selected site by the AMS. So that brings us to chapter 3. So in this chapter, it will cover the 5 principles that could help operationalize the promotion and adoption of CSA practices in Southeast Asia. These were informed through a series of iteration of the Philippine strategies for climate resilient agriculture that I mentioned a while ago, with consultation workshops and expert discussion. Ideally, these 5 principles will help in full implementation of promotion and adoption of CSA practices. The 5 principles are all relevant and can be addressed individually. So for principle 1, the operationalization questions are prepared, by the way, the operational questions are prepared in a checklist format. It allows you to reflect and evaluate whether at what level you are already in achieving these principles. For example, in principle 1, you have to ask yourself if the CSA could already be implemented at large scale. But then if you think it's not, then we have written example activities that could address the lack of achievement lack of achievement in this principle. Like in this case, if you don't have yet the scale, then some suggestions could be strengthening the farmers' organization or incentivizing the cooperatives. The content of the succeeding principles followed throughout the other principles. In principle 2, we ask the availability and access to CSA financing, which we believe would lead to better investments by more stakeholders, addressing multidimensional challenges of food, nutrition, livelihood insecurities, and poverty reduction. In Principle 3, we focus on educating producers and consumers because we hope to cultivate producers' agripreneurial skills, climate-ready business mindset, and access to market information while increasing consumers' informed decisions would influence them towards more sustainable options. In Principle 4, we highlight digitalization that will foster climate readiness and market competitiveness and will catalyze Agriculture 4.0 with faster, wider reach, and up-to-date informed producers, consumers, and policymakers or the implementers. And finally, in Principle 5, we included a cross-cutting principle on policy and governance that would ensure operationalization and implementation of the different CSA practices. Further discussion on this will be presented by Dr. Pedro Rencio after this presentation. And an announcement, an international conference is scheduled on November 8 to 10, 2021, and we invite you to attend. And this will be explained later on by Ms. Hannah. We also emphasize the need for monitoring and evaluation to ensure the implementation of the 5 principles. This should include a process with tools for assessment that captures both temporal and spatial scales. Now, going to chapter 3, this chapter will showcase the different success stories of climate smart systems level approach that was just presented a while ago by Elso. And so in this volume 3, each of these climate smart practices, or we just allow us just to use the term CASA, and we will discuss it later, will be discussed to include the contents that you see now on the screen. This will be co-written with collaborating institutions across ASEAN, and this will be discussed during the breakout room. And finally, the last chapter is about partners coordinating and implementing institutions for CSA across scales. This chapter describes the roles and responsibilities of various partners coordinating and implementing institutions for CSA practices in Southeast Asia across scales from regional to local. Engaging and involving them in planning and policy making will be a significant step in drawing their support and commitment towards a shared goal of implementing the different CSA and reaping up their benefits. I guess that's my last slide. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romy. So that was an overview about how the general structure for the CSA Guidelines Volume 3 could look like. That represents the ideas our research team currently is having. We will discuss the details of the chapters, at least of the core content chapters in the breakout groups, but do you have any questions towards Dr. Romy or any immediate comments right now? I see a raised hand by Dada. Please go ahead.
Guys, sorry that I'm again making a comment. Just one of the caution on the term, on the question, the framing of the question, how will this be implemented? I would suggest instead of asking questions like how will this be implemented, the question that will shape the direction of this would be how can ASEAN seek greater support for its implementation for these practices? Because we have to recognize that the practices or approaches that we are actually discussing are already being implemented on the ground and they have each particular support already. So it's more not about how will this, we don't want to create false expectations with a guideline by saying that these are not new practices, right? So we don't have to stand on a context of this guideline showing an implementation plan. Also, let's just also take into consideration that that sometimes scaling up is not always the target, right? Scaling up is always good, but scaling up sometimes is not a target for some realities and some context. And quickly, I would like the research team to look into what Dr. Margaret has already done, seeking the TCP of an FAO fund many years ago, in which she tried to look for the best CSA practice to apply in a given situation, utilizing the methodologies created by CSA, I believe, on looking at the best practices for CSA in a given context. This, I think, is what we're trying to do with some of the methodologies I saw here. So that would be a good input because it's already been supported and within the region. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dada. These are all well noted. One of the things that we actually followed is suggested by CCAPS and C at the time. And that's what we follow in developing this Philippine Compendium. Thank you for noting that one.
And I see again a hand from Dr. Maxson. Please.
Thank you, Hannah. And I just that is a good comprehensive and bit clear for me for this guideline. I just would like to clarify in 2 points. Because you see in our like our approach, our strategy, we have 1 point: support resilient infrastructure for agriculture. So I would like to see this point, which chapter they are recommended. Because you see that is a support to the resilient to livelihood as well as in the food system. That means like a irrigation system or contracting road or facility storage or whatever. That is the important point. And another point for the policy and governance. In our case, we just put like a governance and capacity, human resources development related to the CSA, because the policy as a tool of governance. For example, strengthening of governance, we like strengthening or enforcement of regulation policy, so something like this. So I just would like to clarify difference between policy and governance, because by my understanding, policy is a tool of the governance. That is the point. And another point, like digital, did you include like early warning system? Or how to call like a remote sensing for forecasting, drought or whatever, include this in this point, because the remote sensing information is good tool or information provide to implement like a crop insurance, support to the crop insurance. So that I just would like to clarify on this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mac, for those questions. I hope this is not a Miss Universe questions that I have to answer. Okay, for your question number 1, which relates to supporting the livelihood and supporting the food security. Actually, that is the purpose of this. Let's say the different CSA on Chapter 3 that will answer to this query of yours. So I hope we could tackle that one. And that will be discussed further in the breakout room. For the role of governance, I think I will reserve my answer to Dr. Ped because he will have a long discussion on that, and I don't like to preempt his presentation. But if you could wait, Dr. Ped could explain that further.
Thank you.
And then for number three, digitalization. Actually, that's why we have this climate smart map that was well implemented in Vietnam, because the way the same questions that you have, how you could put all these different IT technology, the GIS, these other things, and these are one thing that this practical CS mapping of Vietnam case will be implemented. And I hope we have Vietnam colleagues here in the group that could help explain it further to us, even during the breakout room.
Thank you.
So yeah. So we hope we could answer all those your questions. Thank you, Dr. Pell.
Thank you.
Doc Romy, there is a comment by Kuhn Margaret in the chat. She is writing, as Dada mentioned, regarding the FAO project, the result is actually aimed at proposing investment portfolio for private sector engagement towards increasing investment in implementation on the ground. Therefore, Volume 3 should have policy recommendations on how we could mobilize the guideline for implementation on the ground and reach farmer communities. So definitely taken as a request towards the research team. Any immediate reactions to that?
Well noted, Margaret. We will have to work on that on chapter 4, the last chapter. Thank you for reminding that again. And I hope Dr. Ped can discuss that also in his presentation. Thank you, Margaret.
Are there any questions or comments?
I would like just to clarify the first point. What we are not refer to the resilient livelihood, but we refer to the support infrastructure. Support resilient infrastructure for agriculture. Yeah, that is like irrigation or irrigation technology or connecting road or system or to warehouse, to preserve production storage. Because you see some production are easy to affect by the climate change. For example, like for rice harvesting during the pre-monsoon, probably we need how to call a seed dryer facility. Like that include in the guideline or not include for resilient infrastructure? That is my question.
Well, initially we don't really include that infrastructure thing here because it's kind of scary for us to go with that one. We focus more on technology and practices, but we will consider that. And definitely there are some practices already in terms of post-harvest, and that has been already presented even in Volume 1. And there are new things coming out in terms of from production to pre-production to production to post-production and even the marketing. And so these are what we call now the value chain practices in terms of whatever commodity or entrepreneur we would like to venture on as part of the CSA practices. And we could put them together. Like the case for the proposed DSR system. That's why we said it's not only focusing on the planting system method, but on the whole gamut of this value chain of including that infrastructure you just mentioned. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mac.
There is a further comment from Kuhn Margaret that Elson also reacted on in the chat, just where she pointed out that we should also reflect in the guidelines the practices, the experiences that are already being made on the ground, because as it was rightly said already beforehand, these are not new inventions. These are practices that are already tested. So we should also highlight example experience on the ground in the practices. But I guess that will be part of your further research and consultation when you start actually drafting the chapters, right? Okay. So looking at the time, I would suggest we move on to the presentation of, oh, sorry, I see raised hands of Arif Vibovo, please.
Thank you. Just short question. Thank you for the presentation. I'm Arif, and I'm questioning about the. You didn't mention in the identification concerning the climate change, vulnerability, and risk assessment, whether it's already covered in another document or other planning you have already in place. Because agriculture is very, very risky related to climate change, sea level rise as well. Like in many countries, there are many plantation paddy race, paddy field on the coastal area, like mostly in our Java, and the north part of coastal, Thank you. Maybe that's my third question.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Yeah, we hope to include some of those strategies that you mentioned in some of the proposed additional CSA practices. Particularly, well, in my experience working with the CS mapping, that it also covered that kind of vulnerability assessment in order to come out with what kind of recommendations suited for that locality. And that's part of this methodology before you come out with this final product of the CS mapping. Yeah, and I hope we could do that also in Vietnam, in Cambodia, and we're looking forward for the Vietnamese colleagues here to really explain that further to us. Thank you.
You mean it's already done in another volume, or volume 1 or 3?
No, not yet. That's why we're proposing these additional practices to integrate these different experiences from other countries. Hopefully we could do it. But if you have some suggestions, please let us know, and we might be able to incorporate that in the final version of this volume. We really appreciate that one.
Yes, thank you. We will maybe suggest in the breakout session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. That will be helpful. Thank you very much.
We will also talk about how we continue with the research after this consultation workshop towards the end of the workshop. So with a view on the time, please, Dr. Pat, you want to dive at least for a few minutes a little bit deeper into the topic of the policy landscape for climate smart agriculture. Just to briefly introduce Dr. Pat Chris Orencio, he's the program head of CIRCA's Research and Thought Leadership Department, and he leads the Center's Agriculture and Rural Development research initiatives aimed at influencing policy directions, building research capacities, and conducting research activities in Southeast Asia. He has worked on projects that dealt with grassroots development and capacity building related to urban planning, land and water management, climate change adaptation, and environmental protection and conservation in the Philippines and some parts of the Asia-Pacific region. He holds a PhD in environmental science development. Please, Dr. Pat, please, go on with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Hannah, for that introduction, and good morning again, everyone. Can you already see my screen, the presentation? Okay, good, thank you. So as we've already known, implementing CSA really requires this development of the supportive policies, and as we have already shared in the earlier discussions, we've came across how coordination is being made across institutions that are responsible for agriculture, climate change, food security, and land use. And I think Elson mentioned also in his talk about managing contradictions or inconsistencies for achieving the objectives of the CSA. So in this talk, I will specifically look into the ASEAN level perspectives and maybe try to understand on how to support the implementation and adoption of CSA practices as brought about by DADA. So not moving. Okay, now So as you can see from this illustration here, that CSA is an approach, no, and it is basically aimed to respond, to climate variability by employing specific practices and supported by coherent policies frameworks, no, and the objective basically is to respond to productivity, mitigation, and adaptation across various scales. So in many cases, however, there are, of course, the unnecessary trade-offs among these three objectives, as maybe an advancement to one area may negatively impact the others. So the major challenge is how to implement the CSA across multiple places and contexts. And this lies basically on how policies are being coordinated and how policies recognize the trade-offs that will allow, this level of prioritization that's being discussed by the CROMI and reconciling, the three objectives that were put forward for the CSA. So what is the current state of knowledge on CSA? I did a quick look at the CSA related publications in Google Scholar since the time of its conception. And I observed their trajectories over time and scale. And I found that uh, the knowledge are actually manifesting the rapid uptake of this concept after its launch, in 2010, while around 30% are focused on the Southeast Asian region, indicating this tremendous demand, for policy and technical interventions in agriculture that integrates the effects of climate change in the region. So some turning points as well. I would like to highlight this because this properly provide or influence the development of CSA or adoption of CSA in the region, such as the CSA sourcebook, the global conferences, the launch of the Agenda 2030 and the UN SDG. This has triggered basically the widespread adoption of the CSA, particularly for sustainable development and food security under the climate change. So what is CSA when we look at the level of the ASEAN? Well, there have been significant strides in adapting CSA, and this have been mentioned by our colleagues here earlier, citing how the painstaking process of adopting CSA and expanding towards this holistic use of the various contexts. But in the FAF, or the Food, Agriculture, and Forestry Division of the ASEAN, they have this specific strategic trust, which provides the cooperation, which specifically aims to increase resilience to climate change by promoting appropriate agriculture practices. And to be able to assess or monitor the outcomes and outputs of this strategic trust, they came up with sets of key performance indicators which were adopted during the 38 AMAF. So these KPIs includes agriculture GHG emissions as a share in total, the adjusted net savings, and gender and wage gap in agriculture. However, another KPI that is specific for the sector, which I would like to bring into your attention, is it should be contributing to NDC. However, at this time, there's no official target for intervening years from 2015 since the year of the Paris Agreement, except for the end of 2020 under the ratchet mechanism when nations were supposed to formally submit more ambitious commitments for cutting their emissions. Later, we'll share how the NDC would be benefiting from this CSA adoption. So by looking at this graph, we can observe that the contribution of agriculture in GDP, and I think as per the KPIs highlighted by the ASEAN Cooperation, GDP shares of agriculture are all declining, in countries. While this may seem to denote this lack of or lack of progress, in the sector, the decline in agriculture share in output and the employment as per capita output rises is in fact depicting economic development. This is within the perspective of agriculture transformation that we are encountering at the moment in the ASEAN region. But meanwhile, on the other hand, when you look at the right side of the slide or the graph, you can see the GHG contribution of agriculture has also been falling, into the different time series. No, note that the agricultural share may actually be falling because of the economic importance, maybe the decline of the economic importance of agriculture. But this may also be, on the other hand, be a qualitative change, such as possibly due to CSA adoption, or this may probably require more studies, no, which that we need to further define, no, that CSA contribution in this case. Another indicator under the FAP cooperation is adjusted net savings. And these are presented in this table here, the estimates for 2013 and 2017. And by gross savings, I mean it's a standard macroeconomic indicator for income minus the expenditure. And it's usually the fund used for capital formation, which we use for financing our different activities, including agricultural development. But on the other hand, when you look at adjusted net savings, this is a very broad concept which accounts for the total capital stock. And it includes depreciation and also the depletion or damage of ecosystem services such as carbon emission and air pollution. So you can see that that there's this net savings, no, decreasing in the AMS, no. But for agricultural wage gap, on the other hand, on the right side, we can observe that the female workers earn less than males in all years, and this is similar across different sectors, no. So, but in the case of the CLMV, no, the upper table here, the female earnings in agriculture range around 70 to 80% of that of the male earnings. So in the case of the ASEAN 3, the lower part is that the disparity of agriculture is largest for Indonesia, with female earnings falling to less than 60% of the male earnings. But the female earnings in agriculture are closest to males in the Philippines, followed by Thailand. So why are we using these KPIs? This basically represents, you know, the vulnerable sectors or marginalized sectors, which includes women and their contribution to availability of resources for fund activities. So I can see Hannah already. So is it time? Oh, okay. So just to show you that the KPIs shows that there's the increased resilience in the AMS. And I was alluding earlier, no, the progress can be attributed to the two CSA guidelines that were used to design national level programs, basically for capacity building and transforming the activities at scale. But on the other hand, it's showcasing the initial 5 CSA practices in the first volume, which provided the experience to ASEAN-CRN, no, and undertaking the process for guidelines development. And volume 2 has responded to requests for additional guidance by capturing stakeholder experiences. And I think it is also because of these potential benefits that ASEAN through GIZ ventured into updating the CSA guidelines. So meanwhile, there are also guidelines developed in FAF sector, no? And these are all complementary to the CSA guidelines in terms of their indicative focus, the stakeholders, and their scale of implementation. Like, for instance, we have the agroforestry development that aims to support research and development to develop farming technologies. We have the RAI, which supports the generation or diffusion of sustainable and appropriate technologies and practices for resource-efficient systems, no, agriculture system. We have gender, which is also the KPI in the ASEAN cooperation, which aims to strengthen the capacity of policymakers to have this appropriate gender in agriculture. And the PPP, on the other hand, increases private sector participation in policy development. But in addition to these guidelines, we have the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, which was done, which was born of the experience, basically, of the COVID that was experienced by the region, no? And part of the ASEAN Recovery Framework is the promotion of CSA and the proposal of crafting relevant CSA guidelines, no, such as this one. So monitoring the ASEAN cooperation, we have the ASEAN Secretariat. No, it's they're guiding the development and implementation. The roles are basically vested on them, and their focus is more on food and agriculture, forestry. No, but under this food and agriculture forestry division, there's the sectoral development directorate. No, that provides secretariat support to various ASEAN sectoral bodies, no, and working groups, as illustrated in this graph. So reporting basically is like meeting the agenda of various working groups and the ASEAN FAF bodies. So in terms of climate governance, on the other hand, the ASEAN-CRN, no, through the process of collaboration, was also highlighted, no, their roles in the region. And I think this paper by Fasting describes the polycentric approaches which enable an effective climate action at the national regional level. So this is my last slide. Technically, around the world, we know that there are many CSA options that you have identified, and there are varying orientations and entry points. But in Southeast Asia, there are only a few illustrative examples that have been provided earlier by Dr. Romy, and switching to resilient crop varieties, for instance, modifying farm techniques. But I just would like to point out that studies have shown that most of the CSA has focused on increasing productivity, and that's about 82% of the studies or activities are pointed to this one, and about 17.5% are focused on adaptation, and only 0.5% is mitigation. So technically, there are a lot of opportunities for improving its contribution to adaptation and mitigation. So, for instance, in the upper graph, it shows that the practices of the what would contribute to greatest GHG mitigation potential. So, like for instance, agroforestry here has the greatest potential because it enhances low fertility soil. No, but with reference to like the NDC, which is a case in point that I've shown earlier, there are about 67% only refers to agriculture-related adaptation, and mitigation around 78%, but only less than 20% refers to CSA, as mentioned in the NDCs. So in closing, I just would like to impress upon you that we can beef up these numbers, and by placing priority on these elements of success that I've put here on the right-hand side of the slide. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romy, for this wild ride through the dimension of policy and governance in this context. Do you want to say one word about one sentence about the question of Dr. Mark earlier, what the relationship between policy and governance is? One sentence.
I've mentioned that when you talk about governance, this includes institutions, policies, finance, stakeholders. So governance is higher than policies.
All right, thanks a lot. We unfortunately don't have time to discuss this to more depth, but we are looking forward to a rich discussion in our breakout groups. Can I please have the moderation slide for the breakout groups on the screen? So we are already 15 minutes behind time, but I think we have some buffer later on, so I hope this will be still fine. So we will now go to breakout groups that will last for 60 minutes in total. There will be 3 breakout groups reflecting the 3 core chapters of the proposed guidelines. Volume 3, and there will be 2 rounds of discussions. You will be allocated to a breakout group automatically, so you don't have to do anything. That will be done by our technical team. They will basically transfer you to the breakout room. You will discuss about 1 chapter of the guidelines for 35 minutes roughly, and then the facilitators of your sessions will change, and with that the topic will change. Then you will discuss for the next 25 minutes about a 2nd chapter of the volume 3 of the guidelines. And in this 2nd discussion, you will build upon the results that the previous group already has developed in the first round. So you will basically have the chance to go more in depth into discussing 2 of the 3 chapters. We unfortunately don't have time for a third round, but of course all results will be presented in the final plenary. So you of course also have the chance to add further thoughts when we come back to plenary, of course also especially to the chapter that you couldn't discuss to more depth. And of course, this is generally speaking not the end of our discussions. You are always invited to send us written comments and reach out directly to our research team if we cannot capture everything here in this workshop. So with this, please, can I ask the technical team to transfer the facilitators, the note takers, and of course, our participants to the 3 breakout groups. And I asked the facilitators to please explain also about the time management and also watch the time so that we can also allow for a 20 minutes break after the breakout room discussions. We will meet back here at 12:15. We will come back to plenary. This is all being done automatically. The participants, you really don't have to do anything. You don't need to press any buttons. This will all be done automatically. So meet you back in plenary 12:15. Hello, welcome back to all of you. I hope you had a good discussion in the breakout rooms. I hope you also had the chance to at least, I don't know, grab a quick refreshment or go for prayer in our very short break. I appreciate that it is, of course, not a very long break, not sufficient for proper lunchtime. So because of that, I don't want to hold you up any longer, and I will immediately invite our facilitators and note takers from the breakout groups to briefly present on the outputs of the discussion of the 2 rounds. And then, of course, you're all invited to add further thoughts, ask questions to the other groups that you haven't participated in, or to the facilitators if you don't find everything clear that they present. Please feel free to share all your thoughts and comments after we have heard the brief summary of our facilitators. Let's start with group 1. Doc Romy, I believe that's you, right?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Hannah. So, Donna, can you please share? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so Miss Donna is the one who document the discussion, and for group 1, this is more on the discussion of chapter 1, which is prioritization of CSA practices through participatory approach. And there are 2 questions raised in this group. One is on, are the indicators included in the assessment guide enough, or are there any other suggestions? The other one is, what are the steps or processes needed to implement this prioritization exercise? So for group 1, batch 1, we have this group. So they are all smiling and very eager to participate in our discussion. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the highlight of the output of the group 1, batch 1. So the representative from Thailand and Myanmar mentioned that the indicators in the assessment guides are enough already, and they have no further suggestions. And for the second questions, have you tried prioritizing CSA? We added this one. So our colleague from Myanmar, from the Department of Fisheries, Director Turaso, said that resilience for the various fishing communities and highlighting agriculture and forestry is needed. They use, and they also asked them their experiences, and he mentioned that they use the PRA and vulnerability assessment. They would like to be certain that this vulnerability assessment will be included in the prioritization of CSA. Okay, the next group or the next batch Okay, there's another one. What are the steps or processes needed to implement this prioritization? So the colleague from Myanmar, the director, Dr. Turaso, said that participation is very much important from all stakeholders, from the government, from the private sector, and from the farmers and farming communities. And however, he would like to suggest that if it will be conducted in Myanmar, because in Myanmar there are 3 agro zones from the hilly land, the dry zone, and the coastal areas, which is particularly the delta, they would like to get more sort of suggestions on how they will do that in these different ecosystems. So our colleague from Malaysia also shared their experiences in how they divided the 3 regions in Malaysia to what they call it 3 agroclimatic regions, and they call it agro-zonation. So these are the suggestions, the inputs from the participants of Group 1, Batch 1. Okay, next slide, please, Donna. Okay, so yeah, there's another one, but I forgot about this one. There's another suggestions from our colleagues. He's from the ASEAN Agriculture University, the current director of the Climate Smart Center. And she said that in their experience, they involve the students, the farmers, and the faculties when they conduct this kind of process, together with the farmers and the other stakeholders in that ecosystem, that agro-ecozones that they work in. So, they're still on the this is an ongoing activity, and we mentioned that if they could share their results, that will be helpful. Okay, next slide, please, Dora. Now for batch 2, this is the batch 2. Of course, the same. We have a good participations from batch 2. The next slide, please. We build up from the questions from the contributions of batch 1, but then we added, and these were the additional suggestions from the batch 2. This one from the Philippines. She said that the indicators presented are enough in order to determine CSA practices. But since she's more involved in the policy, not on this actual field, they don't have much experience on this one. So, but then there's one participants from Indonesia, from Myanmar, who said that the volume is more focused on crops, and so she would like to request that there will be some sections on crop animal husbandry practices, and that's what section 3 will be focused on, and one of the CSA practice will be on low emission livestock production. So the same thing with our colleague from the Philippines, from Forest Management Bureau. She said that the indicators are well presented. And we have also a colleague here from MARDI. Because he's involved in the research. He said that they address the CSA three pillars, but yet to get experience in the ground about this. Next slide, please. So this the last question is on the steps and processes, and one suggestion is the first step is understanding of the composite indicators related to climate change adaptation. And again, they would like to be certain that the vulnerability assessment and impact assessment could be included. He also suggested that capacity building is very important when in the implementation of this prioritization process, particularly on how to go about these different indicators and scoring things. So he also suggested that there should be they should develop a task force who could help formalize this kind of processes. So I think that's the last one. Donna? Yeah, okay. So I think that's the last one. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Doc Romy. And we move to group 2. I think that's Doc Pat, no?
Okay. So in general, there's this we had a good discussion with with the first group, but then again struggled with the second group's responses. But we were able to gather as much as possible all the inputs, and we found that everybody is in unison that these suggested principles are already enough, and there are no further additions on which to add in this suggested principles. So going back, we have principles for creating skills, availability and access to CSA finance, educating producers, consumers, digitalization, and policy and governance. So because of this agreements with all the groups, we move towards the discussion of what are the actions and specific indicators that would help us further define these principles. So for creating scales, among the points raised were related to developing infrastructure, promoting mechanization and technology development, because this is basically seen as an opportunity for groups of farmers, utilizing or trying to make use of the available technologies to help them with their productivity and their with given the available technology. And the indicators here is that more farmers are using the technologies, the infrastructure and mechanization to support the productivity activities. On the other hand, from the second group, we were able to discuss about how to consider existing and available farming systems and community practices. While the intention is to develop the skills that for further implementing CSA should consider the existing practices, and build on that. And the indicators here would be more farmers having an improved farming systems with consideration of the CSA objectives. And the second principle about availability and access to CSA financing, the suggestions should revolve around how to implement different financing options that would support the CSA practices. First would be this ongoing project on Southeast Asia multi-country, multi-year GCF Readiness Fund for Agriculture. And that will be on a regional level. On the other hand, there will be like national level options, like for instance, promoting the green bonds in Indonesia. But on the other hand, there are also local level financing options, which include savings mobilization systems, as well as developing this fund management systems that are farmer group level. But with consideration of this proposed implementation financing options, the indicators would be how to make sure the effectiveness of coordination with the organizations implementing or managing the fund, and what the level of the access that the different stakeholders to be able to fund their CSA practices, and the amount of fund that is basically utilized for reducing the impact, increasing productivity. On the other hand, at the local level, increasing involvement of farmer groups and accessing revolving funds and providing investments. So next, for the principle on educating producers, we see that this is really important, but we look at it in more of a food systems, and we understand food systems and supply systems by understanding who are the players, from producers and contributors who are contributing in the supply chain. And the indicators of this one would be the level of their participation, which is the level of change in behavior, basically. And since it's more of how to access or promote the CSA, they need to have access to climate risk information and the current state of the market. And this will increase the level of response from the industry to support the SMEs. On digitalization, we discuss about promoting the use of digital bonds and technologies, and providing quick or fast access to information related to education as well, and the application of digital marketing tools. Of us, among the indicators here are the number of agri-producers that are using this digital platform to ensure that there will be non-disruption of the selling and marketing of produce, and development of e-commerce platforms to support like our continuous selling and marketing even through digital, even through social media. For policy and governance, we talk about the guidelines, no? That these guidelines, the CSA guidelines, would be used as a way to formulate national standards for promoting policies and governance of CSA. So the indicators here is the guidelines or the national level standards established at the national or at the sub-national levels. And there's also this discussion about alignment on and ownership to avoid contradictions and reduce the trade-offs. This is when we talk about CSA, there are a lot of stakeholders involved, not only on production but on mitigation and adaptation, and to ensure that there will be like complementation of actions. The department should or the agencies or institutions that are responsible for implementing the different or meeting the objectives of the CSA would be complementing each other. So there will be like no trade-offs across. And finally is to integrate the CSA approach in the government policies and programs. And the indicator there is to have these policy programs integrated with the CSA.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pat. I realize that's a lot of input in a very short amount of time, but I would still invite the group 3 to continue. So please, if you have certain comments or questions to one of the previous summaries, please note them down. You will have the chance to post them in a few minutes. So please, Elson.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, Hannah. Ms. Rochella Lapitan would be presenting on behalf of our group. So Adishel, take the floor.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen first. Okay. For the breakout room 3, we've discussed about the chapter 3 of the guidelines, which is about the systems level approach for climate smart agriculture. And under this chapter, we identified 5 selected systems level approaches for CSA. Among these are the climate smart villages, direct seeded rice system, the CS mapping and adaptation planning, low emission animal production system or LIPS, and the CBFM or the community-based forestry management system. And these are, there are 2 questions that we've asked the 2 batches that we had for this breakout room. The first question is about, do you think the contents of this chapter 3 in the CASA description are enough, or are there any other suggestions that you might want to be added in chapter 3, and who among those AMS countries can lead or could lead the development of describing each of the CASA? And for this, the 2 batches that we had for in discussion for in chapter 3, they all concur that the 5 CSA or the CASAs are enough, but there are general comments that they've given, and among this are these are just general comments. So the distinction of each CASA must be well defined. And then there is also this suggestion that technology and education systems approach, such as learning centers or climate change learning centers, can also be added as system approach. The ecosystems approach may likewise be added in CSV. Another one is about the investment or financial mechanism. The articulation or to highlight fisheries sectors, which is specifically on the aquaculture technologies, which is often overlooked as part of the general term of agriculture, can also be articulated or used. There's also a suggestion about CSA practices on coastal management resource that can be added up. And there are success stories in climate smart mapping in Vietnam that we can also add up in Chapter 3. The linkages among CSA solution or the nature-based solution and focus ecosystems-based solutions can also be added. And then in as part of the Chapter 3 main contents, we can highlight only the contribution to COVID-19 response can likewise be highlighted as case study only. So that's why we are asking or looking for partners in the AMS who can contribute and could provide inputs on this case study about contribution to COVID-19 response. Another one is under the fisheries sector. There is also a suggestion of integrating the ecosystems approach to fisheries management, AFM, or the ecosystems approach to aquaculture management, because there is this technical based toolkits that they've already developed. Another one is the introduction about the freshwater or peripython based freshwater aquaculture that can also be added in Chapter 3. So for the countries or the AMS countries who could lead or who could help us provide a case study or success stories under this 5 selected systems level approaches, we identified Thailand, the potential involvement of Thailand and Vietnam under CSV. For DSR, Philippines, they also identify Philippines and Myanmar. And for the CS mapping and adaptation, it's Vietnam again. We have not yet identified a specific AMS who can provide inputs on LIPS. And for the CBFM, we identified the groups, the 2 batches identified Vietnam, specifically with assistance from ECRAF or C4 who can provide information or case study for the CBFM. For Thailand, it's specifically on fisheries management and also Philippines. That's all from breakout room number 3. So if you have other inputs, Elson, you may speak up.
Thank you so much. No, I think that's perfect, Ate Shell. Thank you so much, Ate Shell. Back to you, Ms. Hannah.
Thank you very much for this summary. Of course, it's only a snapshot of what was provided in the discussions right now. So please feel free to add any further comments, any thoughts, any questions on the summaries of these discussions. Do I see any raised hands? From the summaries of the groups where you participated, do you have the feeling it captured the points, or are you missing something in the summaries? Okay, nobody seems to be concerned that the summary was not correct. But you could only participate in 2 out of 3 groups. So does anyone have an addition to what has been presented to the group where you could not participate
Ms.
in
Hannah?
yourself? Yeah,
Ms. Hannah, actually,
yeah.
there are 2 hands that are.
Oh, sorry, my MS Teams seems to be frozen. Yeah, please call upon them. I can't see it.
Yep. I think you're frozen. Your screen right now is black on my side.
Okay, so, I go out and in again. So please take on moderation for 2 minutes.
Okay, great. No worries. So we have here some hands ready. So we have Dr. Kiao Kiao first. Dr. Kiao Kiao, please go ahead. Take the floor.
Okay, thank you. Just very brief on for the policy and governance. I saw that we have to develop the national and sub-national guideline, right? According to your guideline. So it's any support from the ASEAN to develop on that, like financial or technical. And also we need to those guidelines should be the local language, right? Thank you.
Doc Romy, Doc Ped, do you want to address the comments of Dr. Kiao Kiao?
Thank you, Dr. Chocho. Those issues we will raise that in terms of the national and subnational guidelines. But for now, what we're trying to develop is the ASEAN guideline for this one, and hoping that once this publication is out, we could request somebody to translate this to local language. I hope that answers your query, Dr. Cho.
No.
Yes, thank you. So what is the timing to finish this guideline? And when it will be the national commitment to develop the national guideline? Thank you.
Okay, so Ms. Hannah will present to you in a while the timeline. When will this guideline be finished and will be available? We would like you to wait for Ms. Hannah's presentation on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Response.
So Miss Hannah is back.
I am back. I'm very sorry. I still heard the first question on how to actually proceed with implementing the guidelines and whether they will be available in local languages. I do have a response to that as well, but I see that ASEAN Secretariat is in the meeting as well. So maybe Pak Dian, do you want to say something to that question?
Hello, Miss Hannah. Yeah,
Dr. Mak, do you want to?
Yeah, I just see the group 3, the selection success story of a climate smart agriculture system. So I think one thing we have missing related to the integrated nutrient management. That is very important. That's why I raised this point, because you see the integrated nutrient management to manage how to call soil conservation, soil management and conservation. Yeah, so reflect to the residue management, and also I remember in also with ASEAN we developed the ASEAN integrated nutrient management guideline. Yeah, particularly for specific nutrient management, for example, like nitrogen. Yeah, that is that I show is missing on this practices is good for support a climate smart agriculture approach or practices. Yeah, that is my add to the chapter number 3, group 3. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mak. I think that is noted. And we will consider this together with the other suggestions for practices or aspects of practices to be included. Coming back to the question about how to work with the ASEAN guidelines for climate smart agriculture. Again, is anyone from the ASEAN Secretariat here who want to comment on that?
Hi,
Dian?
Hannah.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think regarding the implementation, this should be part of the action plan of respective working group. Because as you may be aware that climate smart agriculture not only addressed by technical working group on agriculture research and development, but also crops, livestock, main sectoral bodies like fisheries. And then I think once the CSA guidelines concluded, and hopefully it is more practical, it could be mainstreamed by the relevant working group, sectoral bodies under their action plan. I believe their main priority have been identified in respective sectoral body, but with this guideline, I think it will help for the implementation of CSA and respective sector. Nonetheless, of course, still we need some technical support and also other resources from the partners. And I believe that in respective sectoral bodies, they have already engaged with potential partners to provide their technical support. and also in certain extent funding resources to implement the CSA guidelines. I hope it clarifies and help for the discussion later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dian. I would also use this opportunity to highlight the importance of networks of experts like ASEAN-CRN, but I believe there are also others out there because ASEAN-CRN has since many years functioned as a platform where countries and development agencies, research institutions, and so forth meet in order to exchange about support needs of countries and to match who can maybe address these support needs then through additional projects, research activities, and so forth. So I can just encourage to further actively use platforms like this and engage in dialogue. And I can say for GIZ, we will definitely continue to support ASEAN, CRN, and our other ASEAN partners. And I think that holds true for many other development agencies and donors out there. I see Queen Margaret is switching on her camera. Do you want to say something? Or you just want to greet us?
Yeah, Mr. Hana, refer to the group 2, I think, one thing I didn't see the related to the availability and access to the CSA financing. So the agriculture insurance need to be included on this point. In order to let's say the government allocate or also provide subsidies through the crop insurance or agriculture insurance. In our case, also the government allocate the budget for through the microfinance institution, or we call agriculture and rural development bank, to get all or SME bank to get all farmer or producer access to the finance to develop to improve the productivity and income during the climate risk or during the COVID-19 pandemic, something like this. So this could be included or not in the availability and access, because when I saw the discussion, they focus only the green finance and access but for the producer or for the SME, they need to invest farm investment to apply CSA practices. Maybe they need financing funds through the micro, I don't know in ASEAN country called, but in our country called microfinance institution, and also in the rural agriculture, the government bank we call the Rural and Agriculture Development Bank. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mark, for highlighting again the need to reflect on this aspect of finance and what different tools are out there, for example, like insurances, but I believe there are also other tools for supporting farmers and small medium enterprises in accessing funds or mobilizing funds. So that is definitely noted for our research team. Kun Margaret, I see you raised your hand. Please.
Yeah. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so one thing that the farmer networks are trying to tell me is they want to promote their success stories on the ground, and they would like to invite ASEAN member states to come and see and learn from our network. What they want is patience of these success stories. So I wonder whether GIZ could fund some kind of activities on this. At this moment, maybe it's not possible. I changed a visit from the AMS to showcase all these climate smart practices, and they would also like experts and on the technologies that the farmers have developed. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Noted on the request, which will be difficult to implement right now, but definitely noted. Maybe also something that, again, could be picked up in the context of ASEAN-CRN and the ASEAN-CRN work plan. So with a look at the time, any urgent comments now? It is not the end of consultation, of course. We will, with the documentation of this event, we will again share contact addresses where you can send further comments and inputs to. Definitely, we are still looking for pointers where we can find good examples so that we can showcase what is already happening. So please share with us anything that you can think of that might be helpful in writing as well after this workshop. I don't see any raised hands anymore, so maybe we can then move forward and I will briefly explain the next steps for developing the CSA guidelines. Can I please have the slide for that? Thank you. All right. So those of you who participated in the first workshop should have seen that already. So in July and August, we kicked off this development process of Volume 3 of the CSA guidelines. I explained about that at the beginning of the workshop. So we are now at the red highlighted point in time, the second consultation workshop. We will, of course, share with everyone who participated here today and also with the relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies and, of course, ASEAN-CRN, the documentation of this event, to which you can still reply and send your comments and information as I highlighted earlier. In parallel, our research team from CIRCA will now revise the noted outline based on your comments and then start preparing a zero draft of the actual guidelines. We will send these drafts within October for review to members of ASEAN-CRN and to the selected ASEAN working groups who are, working on these topics. And of course, you can then also share again in your network if you think that is relevant. Further, our CIRCA colleagues will get in touch with selected experts and representatives from countries, some of which are here gathered today, to follow up on some of the pointers that we received in the research and consultation process and to gather more information so that we can really have a lot of flesh on the bones, basically, of the structure that you're seeing here today. A lot of rich information that is actually of practical value to you. After going through a first round of revisions, there will be a next version of the draft guidelines, which we will then further coordinate more in depth with ASEAN-CRN and ATWGARD, because in the end, ASEAN-CRN and ATWGARD are the bodies and the responsible agencies who will have the ownership for this political product, this political ASEAN product. So we will seek endorsement by ATWGARD at the end of this process. Once this has been done, all this revision process has been finalized, and we received endorsement first through ASEAN-CRN and then officially through ATWGARD. The final product will be submitted to some AMAF for a final endorsement, hopefully in November. We are not sure yet if we will meet that timeline, but that is what we envision. What we envision right now. One highlight that I also wanted to make here, it's not part of the official consultation process, but I think Dr. Pat was already referring to that, so I would like to make it an official announcement. We are supporting ASEAN-CRN to host an ASEAN conference on policy and governance for climate smart land use. The dates that have been selected for this are 8th to 10th November 2021. We are currently in preparation process. You will receive receive information and how to register and so forth in due time. But please, you can already, book your calendars for these days. And during that conference, we will, of course, reflect about different aspects of governance for promoting climate smart land use. And we will also give an update on the status of developing the CSA guidelines. So it's not part of the official consultation process, but it will be again a chance to reflect on certain aspects, and you will also get an update on where we stand in terms of the guidelines. So with this, I would like to start closing the workshop, and I would like actually to hand over to the ASEAN Secretariat to also provide their perspectives on the process and how we will continue from here, more from the political ASEAN perspective. I see, Dian, that you switched on your camera. I was actually expecting Dr. Min to join, but I guess you are replacing him, correct?
Mr. Hannah, Hannah,
Yeah.
could I just check the last
Oh yeah, please.
agenda? Yeah, because you see some of us during the early November will be joined to the COP26. Yeah, so probably during the schedule of during the conference you put in the last slide. During 8 to 10, so I think that may be difficult for some our team to join, because for some of them they will go to the COP26. Yeah, during the 1st November to 10 or 12, something like this. That is the schedule. So yeah, thank you for this step on this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mak. Yes, I'm aware of COP26. It is super difficult to find a time slot at all where to fit in a conference like this. The conference is, of course, not full day. It is a few hours each day, but we will, of course, reconsider again. But as I said, it is very, very hard to find a good moment in time to host a conference like that. But yeah, we will definitely get in touch with ASEAN-CRN on this very soon again, and send some updated information on this conference. And yeah, I appreciate then your inputs on that. So, Dian. Please, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. First, I would like to send regard from Dr. Min, because he could not join this very important consultation workshop due to the conflicting schedule. So I learned that the participant has discussed the outline, and the expression is that the ASEAN member state, participant from ASEAN member states actually underline the need to have more practical guideline with the realistic maybe implementation plan and roadmap. Hopefully there will be kind of distinction of the previous first and the second guideline. And also the important part of the guideline is also underlined by Dr. Mak, is how we could optimize resource mobilization to support the guideline, the CSA guideline implementation, and how to also mainstreaming the practical guidelines into respective sectoral bodies under our cooperation. I think those resource mobilization is not only in terms of funding resources, but also the technical support and window for capacity building for ASEAN member states to improve themselves in addressing CSA implementation in their respective sector. And again, I would like to thank to the organizer, to you, Hannah, and to the ASEAN GIZ CSLU project, who has generously support the development of the guideline. This will be one of key deliverables in 2020. And I also noted the timeline has been presented, and the concern from our colleague, Dr. Mark from ASEAN member state, I think he is also representing the other member state, that during November might be there are some conflicting issue with the other international event, and even with the some even at the regional level. Again, I would like to congratulate our colleague from CRK for coming with the draft outline, annotated outline, and we are looking forward for incorporating the comment from the ASEAN member state and from the participant of the consultation workshop. And then ASEAN Secretariat ready once it is concluded among the ASEAN-CRN member. The ASEAN Secretariat will facilitate further feedback and approval by the ASEAN Technical Working Group on Agriculture Research Development, and subsequently submit to the SOM-AMAP for their consideration and endorsement. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to conclude our remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dian, also for providing again more guidance for our research team and for us to further discuss what the way forward is in developing the actual guidelines. We will be in touch with all of you soon. As I just explained, we will send the report of this event. We will publish the recording. So if you have colleagues who couldn't join but are interested in the topic, you can also share the link to the recording so that they can maybe listen to some of the presentations. And maybe Miso team, could you show the thank you slide, because on that slide you can also see two email addresses. It's my email address and the one of Dr. Pat. So if you want to get in touch with us, please feel free to do so at any time. With that, thank you very, very much for your time, for all your inputs, for the energy, your continuous great collaboration in the ASEAN space. Please, everyone, stay healthy in these still difficult times. And yes, have a good day. And now it's, at least for me, really time for lunch. I don't know about you. Okay, hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.